Angelo, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And as we have talked about in the semester, really everything that we do is storytelling in one form or another. And making a movie is just another form of storytelling, whether you're giving highlights of a game, whether you're interviewing a player, doing a feature on a player or a team, whether you're doing a podcast, it's all storytelling. And Angelo has told the stories of two of the more iconic events that have happened in Indiana sports. Of course, Rudy, and then Hoosiers, which was inspired by the Milan High School win in the state championships. And as I've said in the class before, when you grow up in Indiana, basketball becomes part of your DNA. It becomes part of your being because high school basketball means so much to so many of the towns and the cities in Indiana and always have.
Hmm.
And my running joke always is before we learn about John 3:16, we learn about Milan 1954 because Milan was the smallest of small schools, and in 1954 they defeated the powerhouse Muncie Central in the state finals. And not only did that give hope to every little school, but it really was a reflection of the basketball tournament at that time because it was one class. You know, everybody played everybody. It wasn't divided up into enrollments. And there were more than 400 high schools in Indiana at the time. So being able to even get to the Final Four was quite an accomplishment. But
I think there were over 700.
yeah, well, probably, yeah. I mean, because every little bird had a high school back then. But that was ultimately the David and Goliath story when you're talking about basketball. And uh, that, of course, was the inspiration for the movie Hoosiers. And CBS Mornings just did a story a few weeks ago about the upcoming 40th anniversary of the movie Hoosiers and what it all meant. But I know that we're going to talk about Rudy, but before we talk about Rudy, we have to talk about Hoosiers because Hoosiers kind of begat the Rudy story. And so, Angelo, I will let you start by talking about the idea of the movie, the screenplay, the struggles that you had to get that screenplay to life, and kind of the process on how the screenplay came about and how the movie was made. So, Angelo, I'll turn it over to you.
Are you talking about Hoosiers?
Yes, let's talk
Oh,
about them first, and then we'll go to Rudy.
well, first of all, going back to my education, I went to Indiana University as an undergrad, majored in political science, and then wasn't really happy with that career track and didn't know what I wanted to do. So I took a couple of years off until I realized I had to do something to make a living. And my dad encouraged me to try to get a degree in something that I loved. And even if I couldn't get a job in that area, I could teach it. So the only thing that I truly loved was film. And I didn't imagine myself as a filmmaker. I never thought of myself as a creative person. So I got into USC very luckily. USC was University of Southern California was just starting an academic approach, not a production approach to film. And so my a degree, my master's was in history, theory, and criticism. And ultimately, the master's thesis was the basis on which the PhD thesis I worked on. And I watched a lot of films. That particular thesis title was The Genre Theory of Film Criticism. So I watched a lot of gangster films, a lot of westerns, and I I accumulated a lot of knowledge about existing films, and of course, genre films that would include not necessarily specific genre like gangster film, but also I would compare different films by this was in opposition of the auteur theory. So where films are analyzed based on the directors and their work, their oeuvre. When I graduated, I was just short of getting my hours to take my doctoral orals, and I needed 3 more hours, and I they gave me an opportunity to do an internship, which usually um, given only to production students. So I didn't have what was left was not any films or TV movies, but a sitcom, which I had no interest in. But that changed my life when I grabbed it. And it was the last season of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And in the process of working for that semester as an intern, I got to know Grant Tinker, who was the president of MTM Productions and married to Mary. And he kind of took me under his wing, and we watched every show together. And I think he was a film buff, and we ended up talking about films quite a bit. And he had knew somebody on the lot who gave him who wanted to know if he knew anybody to do research for him on a television series that he just got ordered, 14 episodes. And I went and I met with this guy, and this guy changed my life because he offered me a job as an assistant after I brought back the research, and told me I could learn more about making films, working with him in those 14 one-hour drama episodes than I could in 5 years in film school. And that was true. Everything I do today was based on what I learned in that 5 month period of time. And then the series wasn't picked up, but my mentor started to initially he was kind of guiding me, but then I went off on my own too. Whereas I worked in what they call development or executive jobs. So I worked for Warner Brothers, started off in the story department. Then I became director of development for miniseries and movies of the week for another company. Then 20th Century Fox. Started working in feature films, and I ended up in a company called Time Life Films, and that was uh, that was vice president of production. And during that time, that was 6 years total. Um, I learned about how to make movies, and I really learned about screenwriting because my main job was to work with writers. And I mean, I read probably over 1,000 screenplays, but I also worked with some great writers and some writers who were just starting out, and some writers like John Grisham, who had never written a screenplay, who wanted a shot at it. So that was a fascinating experience. And once the screenplay was ready, then I would sometimes follow it through and become supervisor of production and help to hire the various personnel, crew personnel, and worked in both television and feature films, but ended up the last year in feature films. And the president of the company asked me if I had any pet projects, and I had this idea to do a movie about the relationship between the people in Indiana and basketball. And of course, the classic state myth is the Milan stories you mentioned. And I pitched it to him. He said, "Great." And well, at the time, there was a movie out called Breaking Away that was shot in my hometown, and which I liked very much, but it wasn't very accurate to my judgment about who the people were in Indiana or Bloomington, in fact. So I really wanted to find somebody who was from Indiana, who didn't have to do research, who kind of knew how people walked and talked and chewed gum here. And I read a lot of different samples of writing, but nothing quite clicked. And it was right at that time, it was 1980, 81. Yes, exactly 81, because Indiana basketball won this national championship. So I was actually in New York, um, kind of finishing up what was to be a breakup of the company I worked for. Time Life Films broke up into two different companies, HBO and TriStar. And TriStar was not going to happen for another year. HBO was only making documentaries and occasionally doing other things that they were exploring making feature films at that time, longer films, drama films. So they paid me out in full my contract, which was about 6 months, and I started doing research uh, to hand over to a writer who was going to write the Indiana project in my time off, and I ended up trying to find a way in which I could tell the story that was compelling, and I wanted to tell the real story, and this is, I think, critical to understand about any storytelling, at least under the aegis of drama, but everything else too. So I took one screenwriting class at USC. It was a screenwriting analysis class. I'm glad they said it that way. Um, and the teacher had a book that he assigned to us. It was called The Art of Dramatic Writing by Alalos Egri. And he had the basic thesis for that book was a sentence on the bulletin board or the chalkboard at that time. And it was the essence of all drama is conflict. And without conflict, you have no drama. So one of the things that I was looking for is what is the central conflict or conflicts in the Milan story? Beside the little team going up against the big team, which is basically impersonal because they don't really know each other, see each other until they get to that game. And external, it's not internal. Therefore, it will carry no weight, no emotion unless it's internal. And I found out there was a player who was on that team who lived in Milan because I went down to the state capital, not the state capital, the county capital, Versailles, and end up doing research for a couple of days, just going back into the papers and making notes, and found out that that player was there and end up talking to him about looking for some sort of conflict. And I asked him, did everybody get along? And he said, oh, yeah, we're like a family, we're close. And we started playing ball together when we were in third grade. And and I said, what about the coach? Oh, we love the coach. The coach loved us. And it was like, the more I thought about it, the more I thought what a boring movie it would be. So as I was driving home, I decided to create the characters whole cloth and start with the idea that this would be inspired by and not based on. And that's when I started driving home to Bloomington from Versailles. I started to think about writing it myself. And my family had a summer home up in northern Michigan, Michigan City. It's right in Beverly Hills, Beverly Shores, sorry. And so I went up there and I tried to write, and that was a disaster. Um, because the thing about my abilities to analyze, break down, and discuss screenplays was fairly advanced. And as I said, I had a lot of experience doing that. But creating screenplays and understanding how they work and talking about them are two totally different things. I really believe in the separation of your left brain and right brain. And my rational, linear, analytical side of my brain was very, very well developed. But my creative, emotional, and subjective side of my brain was weak. It was not developed at all. And I kept on reading after what I wrote after the end of a day and throwing it out. I think I got maybe 10 pages after 2 weeks, and I gave up basically and made a decision I wasn't a writer and I shouldn't be doing this. So I went back and partnered with a good friend of mine. We started a development deal at Paramount. And when I was there, I ran into a really good the guy who I knew really well. I wouldn't call him a friend because he was the creator of the first show I worked on, that drama that I mentioned. And brilliant, brilliant guy who was a novelist as well as a screenwriter, not a combination that's usual. And he always had a sense. He always told me he thought I was going to end up being a writer, and I thought it was insane that he would say something like that. He said I had a writer's sensibility, whatever that means. And so I told him this story. I said I went and I tried this idea of trying to write this script, and it was a disaster. Yeah, not I'm not built that way. I should be on the other side of the desk. And he kind of laughed, and he thought about it, and well, he said, "Do you know who Vladimir Nabokov is?" I said, "Yeah, of course I do. Yes." But he said, "Well, maybe you should think about going back and trying to write this script using the Nabokov method." I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, he had he said the biggest enemy to his writing was the critic on his shoulder, and the way to quiet the critic on his shoulder is to never read what he wrote. So he would start a novel and he would never read a single word until he got to the end." He actually talked about it. He said, "What I do is I vomit on my typewriter for 2 months, and then I spent the next 3 or 4 months cleaning it up." So I thought about that was an interesting notion, never having to judge your own material. And so it wasn't right away, but I kind of doodled with the idea and I started writing the script again from scratch. And I kept on turning the page over and never reread a single thing I wrote until I got to the end. And that's how I got to the end. And that's how I wrote my first script. Now I can keep going on this, but you tell me when to stop. And by the way, I should add, 50, probably close to 50. I'm at 40, probably 46 to 48 scripts. I still write that way. The critic never goes away. It's always there. No matter what kind of success you've had, knowing what kind of knowledge that you accrue, you're going to always judge yourself in a negative light, in a light, by the way, that is not remotely analytical, linear, and objective.
So I know that,
I feel like I could keep on talking,
oh,
but
I
I
know.
got to be open to questions too.
And that's wonderful. No, I love this. I do want, before we hop over to Rudy, I do want you to bring up a point that you talked about in your TED talk about writing the script and then just getting like the ultimate rejection, and how you really had to gather yourself up and try it again before you actually got the script to the right people in the right hands to make the movie.
Yeah, well, when I finished the script, I was sort of like terrified of showing it to anybody. But the person that was most insistent on seeing it was my mentor, was the person who kind of trained me. And I think at a certain level that he was irritated that I was taking this route out, becoming a writer and not continue to be executive, because he had mentored another one of he had a bunch of he mentored like two or three people who like presidents of studios and networks, and he saw me on that path. And he told me it was a stupid idea, but that I tried to write this script. And at any rate, he insisted on, and he, by the way, he was an incredibly intelligent, smart guy, brilliant guy. And he ended up, I, I ended up talking me into letting him read the script, which was ultimately a big mistake. But he called me up, and this is where I got emotional. And the speech is after he read it, and he told me that it was without redeeming value, that there wasn't a single scene he thought was decent, because I was looking for notes for maybe a rewrite because I knew it was probably pretty rough, and he said throw it away, just go back to work, do what you do best. And that was devastating to me. And in fact, it was shaming more than anything else, because when you're writing from, and I think all writing, it comes from a very subjective place. There's no way of knowing that you can, in fact, be clear on your own work. And and I had given away so much power to this guy that I believed him. I believed it was a terrible script, and it shamed me. and to the point where I took the script, I threw it in the back of my closet, not to be read by anybody. And nobody did read it. My girlfriend didn't read it. It didn't. Um, I just I told people about the year I took off writing the script, I just said it was a mistake. I shouldn't have ever tried it. I'm not a writer. It was about 6 months later that I was at a dinner party, and I was sitting next to a guy who was another brilliant human being, who was a biographer. In fact, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his Charles Lindbergh biography. And he was a real, his dad was a president of a production company. He was a film business guy, but he chose to be a biographer. And his brother was president of the biggest, one of the biggest agencies in town, MCA. I'm sorry, William Morris. But he ended up talking to me a long time about books, and he asked me if I'd ever thought about writing, and I told him this story. And he was flabbergasted that I gave the power for one person to judge my material, and that was it. And he started insisting on reading it, and I was too embarrassed to give it to him. But I kept on running into him, just I don't know, providentially, I suppose. And he finally worked me into convincing me to give it to him. And he read it in the afternoon, called me that afternoon. He called me later in an afternoon, and he said, "You've got a great movie here. Uh, it's just long. I can help you edit it." And he did help me edit, and that was everything in that script was in the movie. So, and it took me 3 years to get the movie made, but yeah, it wasn't like magic, and but that's a whole other class. That 3 years, that journey of we probably had well over a couple hundred no's before we got a yes.
Well, and it only takes one yes, and that's all you need. You just have to
One
keep
guy
getting
with a
yes.
checkbook.
Yep,
We always say
exactly.
it's one guy with a checkbook. Yeah.
Exactly. So, as I mentioned, it's the 40th anniversary this year of the movie Hoosiers. Hoosiers had a couple of Oscar nods. A great story, big hit. People loved it. Life is good. And as I mentioned, the success of Hoosiers really led to the making of Rudy. So let's hop over to South Bend and Rudy and how that process got started.
Well, Rudy, the real Rudy, had seen our film and decided we were the guys to make it. And I got a call from, he somehow got through to one of my good friends through my good friend's brother. And they sort of pitched it in a little bit of telephone and ended up hearing the story. And I had an overall deal at Orion Pictures with David Anspaugh, the director of both films. And David really liked the story, thought it was interesting, and ended up uh, because he was a Notre Dame fan. He grew up in Fort Wayne, and I was not, as I mentioned, and really didn't honestly think that there was much to the story. Oftentimes when you're thinking about if a film has any kind of possibility for commercial success, how does it reduce to a log line or a paragraph? And reducing Rudy to a log line or a paragraph came was the kind of thing that made me think I wouldn't go see it. Now, if I wouldn't go see it, I love sports and football, I was like, I don't know, it just didn't feel that interesting to me. And so I said no, and that was enough for David because he's not going to do anything without me. But Rudy never gave up. He kept on calling, kept on sending material, and he's a guy who's, as you see in the movie, is fundamentally incapable of hearing the word no. Meanwhile, I was writing another script, doing another rewrite for the company for Orion. I was not really paying much attention to it. And then, to the point, Rudy even showed up in LA trying to hunt me down. And I finally did talk to him. And I said, I'm not going to do this story. I don't want to be pigeonholed doing sports movies in Indiana. And it's just not not my movie. It's not something I'm going to do. And he asked me if I could give him names of other writers. I mean, he was relentless. So it was 2 years later when after Rudy made the first call, maybe three, I don't know. David Anspaugh was in the office of two producers who had an overall deal at Columbia Pictures, and they were pitching David a baseball story. And then they started talking about different, interesting sports stories. And then David told him the Rudy story. Well, they got really excited because they had just had lunch with the president of the studio, and he had a lot of Notre Dame paraphernalia, football paraphernalia in his office. And they asked him if he went there. He said no, it was the great heartache of his life that he never got accepted to Notre Dame. He ended up having to go to Michigan State, but he never lost his love for Notre Dame football. And all of a sudden, I'm getting a call from David said they want us to go in and pitch to the president of Columbia, and I said no, I'm not doing it. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Please, they see us as a team. Will you just go in there and sit? Well, find another writer later. And normally in these kind of circumstances, the writer does the pitch. And David and I, that's always how we kind of work together. I would run the meetings with the studios. And in this case, I said, you're pitching it. I'm not. I don't care. It's not going to happen. So we went into the office, and usually you don't pitch to a president. You pitch to a vice president, and they kind of like, we'll let you know thing. Every meeting that I'd ever been to, when you pitch it, they always say, we'll let you know. They don't give you immediate answers. Except in this case, he didn't even look at his lieutenants who were standing next to him. Sitting next to him. He leaned over his table and he said, I can't wait to see this movie. And I'm thinking, and Angelo, go and knock him out. And I'm looking at me, what? Me? No, I'm not writing this thing. I didn't say that to him. I knew that would be bad form. So he went out and we went out in the hallway and we called Rudy and I said I said to the two producers, I hope you have a good time finding another writer. And then they cornered me and said they were going to beat the shit out of me if I didn't take the job. Something along that line. There was a lot of threats. The movie was going to fall apart. And I actually did it out of my friendship for David because I knew that if we went back and actually for another writer, that it would put the project in jeopardy. And David really wanted to do it. So I was then faced with the challenge of trying to figure out how to write the movie.
So, and I'm going to open it up for questions right after one more follow up. I'm sure Notre Dame gets pitched story ideas, movie ideas all the time. I mean, going back to Newt Rockne All America and win one for the Gipper and all that. I'm sure they get these ideas all the time pitched to them, and most of the time they say no. How did you get Notre Dame? How did the studio get Notre Dame to say yes to filming this on campus? Because the way the story is written, you can't replicate that. You have to do it on campus. There's so many landmarks, so many familiar landmarks that are in the movie. So how did you get Notre Dame to say yes?
Yeah, that's another story altogether. That was something that we recognized as probably our biggest obstacle to ever getting the movie made because David and I had decided at the time if we didn't get permission, we weren't going to do the movie. As you mentioned, you can't replicate. I mean, you might be able to now with CGI and AI, but that's another story. But I and we were told that it was going to be next to impossible because, as you mentioned, Newt Rockne All American was shot in 1948, and they had turned down every film project since then. That was 53 years, and we were in a place of quandary about how to go about doing it, but it just so happened that I knew somebody, one of the priests, who got us a meeting with Father Beauchamp, the president of the university. And we went in and we pitched the idea and talked to him about why we felt it was important and what was unique about it. And it's not a football movie, et cetera, et cetera. And he explained all the reasons why, Notre Dame doesn't allow films to be on campus. And by the way, I must add, no other films have been allowed ever since then, too. So it's only been two in like what, how many years? Almost 100 years. So we were extraordinarily fortunate. And we gave him the script, and he said he'd read it over the weekend. It was like a Friday, and we spent a long weekend in South Bend waiting to meet with him on Monday morning and thinking that we probably had little to no chance. And we went in, we met with him, and he was incredibly impressive guy and really intelligent. And he talked about the script at great length and brilliantly too. I was so impressed with his understanding of how film worked and what the themes were and what it was about, and um, and how he said that if it was a football movie, he'd be have zero interest. It's not their job and to allow a film company to promote Notre Dame football. And we kept on thinking he was going to say no, but he threw in at the last minute. I went to a dinner party on Saturday night, and I mentioned that I was having, I had a meeting with you and read the script, and everybody there could not talk about how much they loved the movie Hoosiers and how important it was that two Indiana Hoosier boys made it, and not it wasn't some Hollywood version of, and that it was tribal. It was basically a tribal story of people telling their own kind of folk myths. And and he said that influenced me. That you are a local. You're not a Hollywood group, and I think I'm going to let you do it. And that's how we got our shot.
And that's pretty impressive to have those kind of credentials and be able to tell that story from really from an Indiana point of view, because it is different when you can tell it from your heart. So if anyone has questions, this is a great time. Let's jump in. Cooper, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Angelo, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Can you hear me? We're good.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to make sure. I first want to say I really appreciated your advice you gave in the TED Talk about don't personalize rejection. It really spoke to me. I think that we often take it way too, like we take it really personally, but hearing your part of the story was really, really impactful. So I thank you for that. But my question is, I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times, but we all know the story of Kurt Signetti and the Indiana Hoosiers and their football team. So I don't know if it will ever be a movie. So from your perspective, how could that story be told? Is it a movie? Is it a documentary? How will that story be told one day?
Yeah, that's been the source of many talks. And um, I probably did during the course of the playoff run, um, 10 to 15 interviews with national radio shows or CBS. I did one, Hollywood Reporter, and people were emailing me or texting me, this is a movie, you got to write this as a movie, et cetera, et cetera. And I kept on saying no, 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 no. And even to the point when I was in Miami the game itself, and I was leaving, people were yelling at me, write the movie, write the movie, and people I didn't even know. So uh, the discussion, and I said to the various people who really ask, and I talked about it at great length, that I don't think, I mean, I would not be interested as a feature film is to try to dramatically recreate what just happened. I think any sports stories is based on something that's true. It needs time. You need at least a generation. Certainly the Milan story, if you did it right afterwards, would I don't think would be as interesting and compelling. You need perspective, you need distance. I mean, the perfect example is Miracle. I mean, they didn't make the Miracle on Ice, the United States beating Russia in 1982, the year after it happened. It's too raw, too recent. And by the way, I think the other thing is because so many people watched it and experienced it, there's no way you can recreate that experience by casting it. I mean, how are you going to cast Fernando Mendoza and all of those moments that were so indelibly etched in fans like me in our minds? And then it comes down to documentary. And this is where I got into major discussions with the athletic department. You know, the AD there is a friend of mine, and he was, and I had multiple discussions around the documentary idea because the world was coming at them, you know, and studios wanted to wrap it up. They wanted to buy the rights and so on and so forth. And he said something and I'm really not a documentary filmmaker. I always said I would be fine to be a consultant if it was necessary on wherever direction he wanted to go. And I mean, I had 4 or 5 different offers from four different documentary filmmakers to do so. But it really came down to one thing in that regard, and that was Coach Sig's participation and the players' participation, because the only way in which a documentary on that story would be interesting for those people who were not fans and were fans, you need both constituents, is stories that we didn't know about. Because the Big Ten Network, you know, does their profiles. I mean, the Big Ten Network could throw together a documentary, fine, it would work. But we know all the ideas. We've seen all the stories behind it. But you would really have to dig deeper and find something much more compelling that people didn't know about. And Coach Sig told Scott Dolson, the AD, absolutely not. He said, I'm not a rear view mirror guy. I'm not going to spend 1 minute talking about what happened in the past. I'm focused only on what happens next, putting my team together, getting ready for next season. And he said, and my team is not going to devote 1 minute talking about the past. I don't want their heads in the past. So everything's put on hold for now. And Coach Sig said, maybe in 10 years when I retire, I'll be ready to talk about it. So without his participation, nothing's going to happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was just super curious. So thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Again, I can't see everybody, so jump in. Molly, got your hand up?
Yeah, Angelo, I just wanted to say thanks again for being here with us today. And I just wanted to add that I had Rudy on my podcast a couple months ago, and he actually talks about how he hunted you down in LA and like showed up at your doorstep. So when you brought that up, I couldn't help but laugh. That was really funny because he talks about that and how, again, he was so determined to get his story told. But I'm curious, my question is how you kind of reflect those values of hope and emotion, like as you're writing these screenplays and like these stories, and how you embrace all the emotion that goes into it.
Well, that's a good question. And you certainly have a very Irish name. I'm sure that's been commented on. How you can't get any more
Yeah,
Irish than
I get that
Molly
a lot.
O'Malley. Well, my mother's name was Patty Murphy, so that's pretty close. So uh,
Close.
I understand what your question is, but it's sort of hard to talk about only insofar as that to me, what I've learned in terms of just doing it is that my work, the work that I do that creates hopefully emotion in the scenes, the moments through the characters, comes from the process of what I call writing from the inside out. I don't work from outlines because I don't know who my characters are until I write their dialogue, until I find what their voices are. And their voices kind of help me dictate, you know, the shape or the kind of the emotional through lines. Um, and I know so much, probably 95% of my stories, my screenplays are based on true stories. So I usually know the beginning and the end. And I want to be like the audience and discover what's going to happen along the way. Um, and I want to be surprised. And I want my characters to help me be surprised. And and the only way to write from a true place is when you find those voices, you have to, I always think about characters have to be very different, not very different, but they have to be significantly different at the end of the screenplay. And and when everything starts out. And a lot of it comes from their own wounds, their own scars, their own faults, their own issues, their own blind spots, and in the kind of discovery and the action that determines them going up against themselves, their own demons, is really kind of the source of what happens to how the audience connects to the emotion. And it's not something I plan out. It's something that I discover along the way. But I have an intuition about what kind of stories will give me the opportunity to find the kind of organic and emotional truths that really work on film rather than calculated. Oh, I'm going to make sure they cry here. That's writing from the outside in. And I am sometimes very surprised um, that I get to a place where I think has possibility for emotion. Um, and that is that I need to feel it, and I don't. And there are other times that surprise me that something really emotional happens, and it's a discovery that I never saw coming. And I think that serendipity is a good thing because that's where an audience is caught up in surprise too. And that's the probably easiest way to get an authentic emotional response from an audience is to be surprised by it. Because if you see it coming, if you know that the two lovers are going to separate, it's like, okay, when's it going to happen? And let's get it over with. And then when it happens, it's not as emotional. You think it's going to be. So there's just, it's really hard to describe that my process is writing from the inside out rather than the outside in. And that wasn't always the case because when I worked as an executive, I was all about working from the outside in. I was all about analyzing, breaking down, moving characters around, and writing outlines. But I find writing outlines is like writing with a straitjacket on. Does that answer your question in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, it does. That makes sense. Thank you.
Anybody else with a question? Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, Angela, thanks again for the time. And it's great to hear all these stories. And I am curious when it comes to Rudy, let's say, because that's the one we all know, and the characters like D Bob and Mary and all of these other side characters. How do you create these characters? Is it just talking to Rudy? I mean, I'm sure you're talking to the actual people themselves, but how big of a role did they actually play in, forming who they are?
Yeah, I think that, in the case of the true story aspect of it, there was a particular line. It's a legal axiom that was sort of my guiding star, which was that if I'm not so interested in writing the truth as to the letter of the truth, but it has to honor the spirit of the truth. So there were certain characters in Rudy's life that I wanted to include in the story, like Debop. Um, and there were certain characters that didn't exist. There was no Mary, in Rudy's life. There were his brothers, but brothers were all supported. So I had to create a brother that wasn't. And but again, it's really honoring the spirit of the truth more than the letter of the truth because everybody in his family doubted him and thought it was a insane idea. Now, um, it when you develop characters, you find ways in, and usually they're characteristics or there's a way in which they talk that you try to differentiate from other people in the way they talk. And in this case, I had the real Debop to work from. But then when we cast John Favreau, uh, he came from Groundlings. He was Second City rather, and he did a lot of improv stuff. So we told him to go for it. And a lot of the Bebop lines are John's just kind of like riffing, and that was very helpful. And normally I don't work that way. David and I don't work that way. I don't work that way as a director. But in this case, it made sense.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. He's one of my favorite characters too. I just find him so funny. So that makes sense that he's just
Yeah,
riffing.
and he's
That's
going to
not
make $1 billion with this new Star Wars movie that he just directed that's coming out in about a month.
That's great.
The
And I know
Mandalorian.
with Mary too, it's or not Mary, his girlfriend back home rather, it's interesting
Yeah,
because I read his book and everything, and it's a lot different where he broke up because he wanted to go to Notre Dame, and that was the whole deal, right? He said, I'm
yeah.
going to Notre Dame with or without you. So it was pretty close. And I'm sure you're not too fond of Joe Montana or anything he has to say.
Yeah, but it's Joe's recollection of that day. He said Rudy was never carried off the field. We have pictures that he was.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a number of people that are not fans of the movie who aren't, look, the Notre Dame athletic department was not helpful to us at all. The Notre Dame, they were kind of pissed off that they finally made a movie with Notre Dame football, and yet they picked a guy who only played 27 seconds and not one of their great, gods of the gridiron or coaches. And yeah, they were irritated about that.
Yeah,
And
well,
they
you
were
made
not
a new
very
one.
helpful at all. Not
And
helpful.
I have a question now off of that. One
Yeah.
last question is the one Easter egg in the movie that I always find funny, and I tell my family when I watch is I forget who it was at Boston College that Notre Dame was playing on the day of filming. It was some other
Yeah.
team that wasn't Georgia Tech. Did you guys know that before putting the movie out that there was some memorabilia in the crowd for a non-Georgia Tech team?
No, I mean, that's the difference between shooting today and then shooting then, which is we are totally dependent on 7 minutes of a halftime of a home game. And we got permission for that 7 minutes, not from the athletic department, but from the band. And again, no help from the athletic department. We got 2 days to shoot. We had two games to shoot. One was Boston College, the other was Penn State. Well, it snowed all that day. We have actually shots of that snow day. And when it came to our preparation for that, we handed out. We were supposed to hand out flyers to let people ask people to stay in their seats and not go for hot dogs at halftime, so we could recreate this world. And I guess very few people actually saw those little handouts, those leaflets. And so I think there was a general shock when another two teams ran out on the field, but then it kept people that curious enough to watch it. And we just hope we cut fast enough that we didn't see any kind of modern dress or signage. If you found it, good for you. But we thought we got away with it. And but to tell you how different things are, we shot that in '94. If we were shooting it today, we wouldn't have any problem at all because we would just use CGI, and we wouldn't need a full stance. We could take our time and put the computer graphics special effects in with the fans. I shot a movie called My All American, and the big game at the end was in a stadium that no longer existed, Razorback Stadium. And how we shot that was that we put AstroTurf on the ground of the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, and I shot for 5 days, And then we went into then basically um, um, computer graphics built the stadium around what I shot with everybody, all the fans in it. And that's how we would have done. That's how we do Hoosiers today too. We wouldn't have to shoot it in Hinkle Fieldhouse. We wouldn't even need Hinkle Fieldhouse. We could build it in the computer.
Yeah, it's like Ted Lasso. Watch that show. That's what they do for those scenes. But
Yeah,
thank you very much.
sure.
All right, we have time for one more question. Anybody want to jump in?
Um, I know that, well, first, thank you for taking the time to be here. But I know that a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, the movie was kind of re-released with some different scenes in it. I was just kind of wondering if you could touch on what went into the original movie and why some of those scenes that appeared in the re-release were cut from the original.
Well, it was pretty simple. In both at Hoosiers and Rudy, this happened to us. Is we were told that they wanted the film less than 2 hours because at the time they wanted to get three screenings a night in for and two. I think our original cut was 2 hours and 20 minutes for Rudy, and for Hoosiers 2 hours and 30 minutes. And they could only do two screenings a night, so that was a big deal back then, and that's why we cut it, and we cut mostly the Mary scenes and put them back in for Rudy, and a couple really good scenes that were why Notre Dame football was important to the Rudiger family. We had that in the CYO scene. Um, yeah, I think it's a bet. I think their what we call the director's cut is a better movie. And in the case of Hoosiers, we just finished the director's cut for that, and that's 20 new minutes of footage from Hoosiers, and that um, they were originally planning to release that in Indianapolis theatrically during the Final Four, but then they realized there'd be too much competition for eyeballs then. So I think they're now going to release it in the fall. But another kind of interesting thing is a big time documentary guy who's done a lot of ESPN documentaries is doing a documentary on the making of Hoosiers. And he has over 700 hours that he is editing right now. And it's gonna be quite something because he interviewed the world on this one. So it was and he got some footage of us shooting back then. It'll be kind of interesting for me, maybe not anybody else.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I can't wait for that either. That'll be a lot of fun. Well, Angelo, I always like to wrap up our classes with some advice from you for our students on looking for what their passion is, making sure they stay the course, making sure that they're not discouraged. And I know in this day and age, it's tough out there. It's tough looking for a job. It's tough really trying to find your passion and trying to follow that path. So if you could wrap it up by just giving the students some advice on their next steps and how they really can figure out and follow what they want to do.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned this, and the TED Talk that I did last fall just dropped because the TED Talk was something I turned down. I was not going to do it. I am never thought of myself as a TED Talk kind of speaker, and every time that I've ever done TED Talk, I mean, every time I've ever been asked to speak, it's been kind of I just throw together some notes and just start telling stories. And but in this case, it's very specific, and you've seen it before. It's a very high bar. People are really good, and I'm just not one of those people. And they happen to have a TED convention in Indianapolis, and the theme was sports, and they were trying to get a name connected to sports in Indiana, which is why the producers kept on pressuring me. And I kept on saying no and the reason I said no, and I realized that it just scared the shit out of me, and I just was terrified of the idea of getting out there and failing. And and it's funny that I didn't even think about the context of that idea, because everything that I've ever done that really provided me any kind of forward momentum in terms of my own personal growth in my vocation and my world has been by overcoming fear. Fear of being laughed at, fear of rejection, fear of failure, in some way, the measure of oneself, and that's what I kind of tried to talk about in the TED Talk, is giving away the power to let other people tell you you're not worthy, or your work is not worthy, or you're not worthy, or it's not, don't go down this path. And the reason I finally said yes to the TED Talk was I was giving the same talk to my son, who was about to launch an idea, but he was scared. And I said, you know, the good things only happen when you're really, really scared and it really terrifies you. And 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 then I got off the phone. I thought, I'm not too old to not learn that lesson, that it never goes away. You're always going to be confronted with things that are going to be tremendous. No, people are going to say no, and it doesn't get easier. And believe me, when I write, I put 6 months of work into a screenplay, and I don't have any objectivity in terms of whether it's any good or not. And I'm terrified when I throw it out there. So um, uh, I would say constantly challenge oneself, and as one of your students mentioned earlier, is never personalize the rejection. Never personalize it, because the minute you do, you're done. You really are done. So, yeah, whatever path you choose, keep on. If you go down one road and it doesn't get you anywhere, go down another road. Don't quit. Just keep on going down road. Keep on knocking on doors, and keep on putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. We always, either we're looking for distractions or comfort, and you're not going to get anywhere by, scrolling or spending hours, returning emails, reading emails, or watching, TikToks and so on and so forth. It's just, you're just holding a place in a space. You're not growing, you're not evolving, you're not changing. And the one thing I'll say for any of the people in the film world here who are interested in pursuing that path, there is one advantage that you have, and 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 that is, if you agree with me that the basis for all, whatever media you choose, it's all storytelling, as you mentioned, Betsy, from the very beginning. It's all storytelling, and the one thing you have control over, and that is, you can write your own stories. I tell this to my son who's trying to break into the film business. Well, you want to be a director, you want to be an actor, you want to be a cameraman, so on and so forth. Somebody has to say yes to you. No one has to say yes for you to sit down and write a story. I don't care what the format is. You can write every day. And that's one of the things that I try to do, is to write every day till to the, even I'm thinking about what I'm gonna, when I get off with you, the next 5, 10 minutes, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, I'm gonna write something.
And especially when you're starting out, the more you write, the better you get. It just
You can there's the only way you can learn, the only way you
yeah.
can grow. And it doesn't even matter whether anybody reads it or not. You can throw it in the back of the closet, but you're going to get an understanding of how to tell stories. And you're going to get an understanding, if you're writing scenes with characters, how to find their voices, how to differentiate their voices. You can only do it not by conceptualizing it, by doing it. And yeah, and it's something you'll have in your control. It's something you can do every day, and that's not anything else in the whole business, in the whole media business.
Yeah. Yep, that is very true. Angelo, thank you so much for your time. You were on my wish list to have in class for this semester, and I'm so glad it worked out for both of us. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate your insight, and especially we appreciate that the advice that you give to the students, that goes a long, long way. So thank you so much for your time. Everybody in the class, thank you so much. We will be back on Zoom on Wednesday, and I'll give you that information later on today. So Angelo, thank you. Can't wait for that director's cut later on this fall. It'll be a great movie. Thanks so
Or
much.
earlier. Yeah. Okay.
Or
You're
earlier.
welcome. Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.